Hello there, you are listening to The Screen Queen, where you'll be finding your favorite movie or your favorite television show and learning something new. You'll just have to listen to find out. Here is your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there and welcome back to the show. As always, and last time I checked, my name is Sammy Parrish and you are listening to your host on the East Coast that brings the most, The Screen Queen. So, your host has been going through the most, quite literally. A while ago on my social media, I made a health update that I had gotten TMJ. Back when I was recording the Lethal Weapon 3 episode, I had just finished re-recording a snippet, and that would be the last I'd ever record that episode before I proceeded to fall to my knees in absolute pain. Couldn't even communicate how much pain I was in. It looked like a horror movie moment. And there's been trips going back and forth to the dentist to figure out what this was, and it's been bouncing around, and a lot of it was brought on by stress. And then having to not stress about it with the current stress that I have, it just was going back and forth for a couple of weeks. But now that I've finally got myself in a healthier place, now I can bring a new episode. Let's talk about why Footloose just exists for existing. So you would think there's not much to talk about Footloose, but there is actually a lot to talk about Footloose. This film is going on 41 years old, but it's not really known like it's known. And I'll explain what I mean by that elaboration. So I asked a lot of people that were around in the 80s what they felt about Footloose or what they liked about it, and anytime I mentioned Footloose, the response I got was, "Oh yeah, I remember that." But I was also told that not many remembered the plot of Footloose, which feels a little funny, like it's kind of self-explanatory. It's a kid that wants to bring dancing back to a town, but realistically it's called the Kevin Bacon dancing movie. So I think that's where the plot gets forgotten because of the fame. And Kevin Bacon has not forgotten one bit why he's famous for Footloose. He famously has to tip the DJs $20 at certain functions for them not to plan or to play Footloose, because no one is letting him forget that he was in Footloose. Even years later, there was no way to escape Kevin Bacon saying, "Let's dance!" So with the film being 41 years old that is forgotten and unforgettable at the same time, what has made that stick around for 41 years? Well, that's why I'm here. So get on your best Sunday shoes and let's get into Footloose. Footloose almost has like a self-explanatory story and a bit of a self-explanatory ending. It's about a guy named Red McCormick that finds out dancing is abolished in this town he moved into with his mom, and well, he fights to get it back. Kind of feels like the day is going to be saved before you even have to watch the movie. But what makes the movie truly worth it is how they had to fight to get dancing back. Not many people know this, but Footloose is actually based off of a true story. A loose true story, though. So it's not just Ren McCormick that saved everybody. In this true story, it's actually several Ren McCormicks that saved the day. And I've done some digging on this, and the best that I could find is this one consolidated piece of trivia. Footloose is loosely based on the events that took place in the small, rural, and extremely religious farming town of Elmore City, Oklahoma in 1978. Dancing had been banned for nearly 90 years until a group of high school teenagers challenged it. So I think you can see where Footloose got its idea from. They just consolidated all of the group of teenagers into Ren McCormick. But I don't know why they wouldn't say loosely based off a true story. Maybe it would derive from it. Maybe they wanted some privacy, that this was just a matter they settled, and after everything was said and done, and director Herbert Ross caught wind of it and went, that's a good idea. And then boom, Footloose was made. But then again, you can look at any story and find that it has some real life tie to an event without having to say based on a true story. Like, take this film for an example, another famous dancing film called Dirty Dancing. The character of Baby is based off of the writer who produced the film, Eleanor Grossman, I think. Let me get her damn name real quick if I'm going to be name dropping people, you know. I got a rep to protect, you know. Where the fuck are you, babe? Eleanor Bergstein. I was not even light years close. Like, take, for example, Dirty Dancing. The character of Baby is entirely... Like, take, for example, Dirty Dancing. And I'm not just saying that because it's a dancing movie. The writer Eleanor Bergstein made Dirty Dancing entirely on the experiences that she had growing up, and then made a character named Baby and Johnny, and well, now you got Dirty Dancing. Every story has some real life tie, whether it was an event or a person. But it's kind of cool that Footloose has a very interesting real life tie, that all these kids did something and then it was eventually inspired to make a movie. It's pretty cool. So it's funny having to basically say that Footloose is technically a semi-autobiographical film. If I had to say that Footloose is played by a perfect cast, and you know, I always say that there's a perfect cast, but this one just... they played their cards just right, because I found out who was almost in some of these roles, and I'm like, yeah, they made a good call on who they got for this movie. In particular, Red McCormick, who was played by a then unknown Kevin Bacon, which launched him into stardom. But the original idea, John Travolta was originally offered the role of Red McCormick, and you know why. Because of a little word called grease. I'm sure you've heard. It's got groove, it's got feeling, and they were feeling John Travolta, but John Travolta, he has a habit of saying no to what could be another great film. It's just one of the many that he said no to. But I think he was okay not having to dance more. He was already pretty tired from Grease and didn't want to do that. I mean, he was already trying to be staying alive. And then there was another guy that was also becoming quite the name in the 80s. A little guy named Tom Cruise, who just came off Risky Business. And during that time, they considered him for Red McCormick, and Tom Cruise denied. And I'm like, that's really good. I don't know if he could really cruise. It wasn't until Tropic Thunder and his dancing moves that I'm like, yeah, I'm glad you didn't cut loose with Footloose. So, yeah, those dancing moves do not have cruise control. No. Heard his singing voice is pretty great, but at least there's that. But then they found a little unknown guy named Kevin Bacon, whose credits were only Friday the 13th and Diner. So this guy was just kind of floating in different projects until they took a chance on him, and wouldn't you know it, you can't not look at Footloose without Kevin Bacon. I mean, it's kind of impossible. He fits the charm so much. I mean, Kevin Bacon was already in his mid-20s, late 20s when he did Footloose, and for what it's worth, he did really fit the part of a 18-year-old senior in some small town that came from a new city. And there are some people that are not the biggest Kevin Bacon fans for the way he plays his characters, but for this being one of his very first ones, like, Kevin definitely deserves his credits for this one. He brought home the bacon for sure. There's a memorable anniversary on Jimmy Kimmel where they reenacted the same kind of plot of Footloose. Like, what? Dancing's not allowed on there anymore? And Kevin Bacon reenacts the warehouse sequence, which has gone on to be the most parodied scene from Footloose. You know, like in Family Guy and Bob's Burgers, and here he is making a real-life parody that was just beautiful gold. It's super enjoyable. I highly recommend anyone to watch it. So, that's gonna sound kind of strange, but I kind of forget John Lithgow plays the pastor in this movie. It kind of feeds into the point I was making earlier about how Footloose can be a forgettable and an unforgettable film at the same time. But, you know, 41 years it has passed, and John Lithgow has clearly had more of a career before and after Footloose. where he's known for other roles than playing the Reverend in Footloose. I mean, I can't even argue with that. One of my favorite roles of his is Dick Solomon from Third Rock from the Sun, and other films that are known and unknown. This guy has such a career that it's kind of easy to forget that he's in Footloose. But at the same time, I can see why he's in Footloose, because I can't see anybody playing Reverend Shaw more except this guy who has a range. If there was like a 6 Degrees of John Lithgow, that would be the easiest and hardest game, because the man's career is such a diverse one. But it's so diverse that I forget he's in Footloose. But for what it's worth, having to really look at him being in this movie and how he does bring Reverend Shaw to a different kind of way to take a very complex role. But he's also a character where his convictions are his weaknesses. Looking at the character of Reverend Shaw, he's not exactly a bad guy, but he does pertain an issue to the whole thing. He is the cause of why we're here, that because his son died and felt that dancing just needs to be out of here to prevent another trauma, he ends up overcompensating, and it's been going on all these years that everyone is afraid to dance. He's inadvertently made life so hard that his own daughter doesn't even want anything to do with him. As much as she tries, there's no way to get through to him. She can get away with whatever she wants, and the way that she can get out of this town to not be around him, and their relationship has become so estranged. The very person he wanted to protect ended up pushing him away because of the severities of not being able to move forward. When Ariel confesses that she's not the girl that, he thinks she is, and says, I'm not even a virgin anymore. When she says that, the way he says, don't you talk like that in here, it's like, that's a man that's terrified to have to hear that someone he loved, bore into the world, last of his children, does not believe the same way he does. That's a man that has had his entire life on the foundry of God, and to hear his own child has not followed that. It is his worst nightmare, and also his anger coming at the same time as a father and man of God, gets me every time. And John Lithgow brought that to such a light to really get his character. It's a character worth an analysis once in a while, and John Lithgow is a guy that brought that to life, even if it's kind of forgotten sometimes that he did. But even though Red McCormick is clearly the star of this, everyone else does fit the film more as time goes on. I mean, you're here for Red McCormick dancing and Kevin shaking his bacon, but everything that goes into this movie, working for how you feel, okay, this is a town that does not like dancing one bit, and if they do something, Reverend Shaw is definitely not going to like anything about that. You feel the structure of how this town has worked under a pastor law, essentially. Everything goes the way Reverend Shaw goes. The way that everything else kind of fits into the story as well, especially particular Reverend Shaw's daughter, Ariel, who, for looking at women in the 80s, there were, some memorable ones, but I feel like Ariel Shaw doesn't really get talked about enough for how she feels like a very individual female. So the character of Ariel Moore is definitely one to study when you look at the way women are written in films, and the way that she is a wild child, but the more you get to know her, she's more than just a wild child. There are so many small town girl stories you hear about, but a lot of things about people that have big dreams that they get out of their small town, and Ariel fits the bill of a character that feels very relatable to get out, even if you don't agree with how she likes her entertainment, that it really pushes the limits. But then you kind of also see her character and be like, okay, so you're partially one of the reasons why your dad is like, hey, no dancing in this town. I lost a child for outlandish antics, and Ariel wasn't too far down the way, but it's like a what could have been. Thankfully, getting to know Ariel's character, she is much smarter and has an ambitions for education and getting out and apply for colleges. Girl's got dreams. and she's not going to let her family get in the way of that. And I can't see anything wrong with that kind of character that has something that everyone can agree with, that you want to make a better life for yourself, even if you're making decisions that aren't great, but at some point you do, and that's the whole point about growing up. Every time I see this film and how Ariel is introduced as this wild child character, I immediately forget the minute that her scholastic side comes out and she has dreams about getting out of here, and even her own boyfriend saying, "Oh, what do you mean you're leaving?" And she gets up like she knows she's in charge of her life and nothing's gonna stop that. There's an adamantness about her that really complements the way the film goes, especially having female characters written in small towns that want to get out. Like, there's so much to emanate with Ariel, and the way that there's so much taken away, and you can feel that through her, who does enjoy dancing and having a healthy life, but unfortunately the role under her father is never going to let that go away. So with Ren coming along, it sort of helps break that barrier that didn't need to be there, and one that she's fought for so long, and there's someone else that feels that way. If it wasn't for Laurie Singer being so charming to make everything work, it helps fill the film out so much more. But also too, I feel like the moms make this movie. It's a very strange compliment, but hear me out. There are so many films that you can run into where the mothers are going to be, against the things or for the things. This is one that actually had two moms that are for what's going on in their own way. Looking at Ren's mother, clearly she likes the fact that her son expresses himself and lets him make his own decisions. In the very beginning of the film, when he wants to go to school with his hair sticking up and the tie on, looking very different, which is kind of close to a lot of conversations we have with our mother of, are you really going to go out like that? Jokes with him saying, well, when you go to college, then you can dress like David Bowie. That was kind of a hilarious way to use David Bowie as like a complimentative scolding. But when shit hits the fan, quite literally, she still backs her son up all the way through, even losing her job, and tells him to shove it. That's a very loving, supportive mother that doesn't fault her son's actions and trusts what he has to do to carry his weight. And when she finally asks, why is this so important to you? It's met with an understanding way, not like a grasping way, which is kind of nice to see a mother do that, just wanting to come to an understanding without prejudice or judgment. And then there's Ariel's mother, Vi, who is another complimentative maternal figure in this movie. Now, I find this a little bit hilarious, but there's been a joke about Diane Wiest that all she did in the 80s was play a mother. And yeah, Parenthood, Lost Boys, this movie, yeah, that checks out. But Footloose was always top tier on my list about Diane Wiest playing mothers. The way she carries a preacher's wife, like the daughter was already enough, knowing this mother had her hands full, especially putting the pieces together when you find out the whole Moore family history. She lost a child in a horrible accident, and she has one more child to raise, and lets her child do whatever she needs to do. But when Ariel gets slapped in the face after standing up to Shaw again, even going so far as to say, you don't even listen to her so casually, and get slapped in the face for it, and Ariel walks on, that's when she takes a step back. And she has to flat out tell her husband, you are great in this, and great in this, and great in this, but your one-on-one needs some work. She called his ass out. That's top tier Diane Wiest as a mom for me. Shaw's actions towards Ariel is justified with, oh, well, I haven't lost my temper, but we're losing her. It's not going through the way that he wants to, and Vi's not going to take it. Vi knows that Ariel is being lost to Shaw, and can understand why Ariel wants to be lost to Shaw. There's so much suffocation that she can't even breathe, and keeps everything quiet and going on. However, she's not going to just let it be tolerated about what's really happening. So she's one of the trustful characters of this film that really knows where the heart of the town is being hurt at, and where Shaw's guidance is hurting the town and hurting their own child. Now here's the funny thing. The moms are not exactly too older than the characters that played their children. Frances Lee McCain was only about 15 years older than Kevin Bacon, so makes her a very young looking mom. Diane Wiest was about 12 to 15 years older than Laurie Singer that played her daughter in the movie. It's like, I wouldn't have guessed that in a million years because they did such a good job with their roles, but you know, it's kind of funny when you look at it. A very funny coinky dink. But besides the dancing, the other big reason why we're here is the music. I mean, this is pretty much 80s bingo for me, how it hit a whole bunch of musicians that I listened to. And I'm not trying to make this about myself, but Footloose was my special interest film when I was 14 years old. I was shocked to find out that everyone that I listened to existed in this movie, and that's like a very rare thing. This is like the equivalent of Sandra Bullock's character in Practical Magic making that man that might not exist, and he existed. Well, Footloose was that one for me. Even though I was literally born in 1995 and this came out in 84, I am going to take that as an answer. It is the most 80s soundtrack. Like, if you had to show someone what the 80s is like, this is one of those films to show someone a straight history of the 80s. This has all the cores of Bonnie Tyler, John Mellencamp, Foreigner, Loverboy, and of course, Kenny Loggins. This man literally put the foot in Footloose. Literally, in the opening of Footloose, he is one of the dancing feet. So he not only put his music in there, but he put himself in there. He is the reason why you cut loose in Footloose. But for what Kenny Loggins' life is like afterwards, Footloose was like one of those double featurette things, because right around the corner came Top Gun, and he gets to work with a little guy named Tom Cruise, who was like, yeah, I was almost Red McCormick. But with a great music soundtrack that it is, it also revitalized a band that was having a hard time in the 80s too. There's a band called Moving Pictures that you probably have never heard of a day in your life unless you've heard the song Never, which is placed in the film. And it's honestly one of my favorite songs from this movie. It's played during the famous warehouse frustration dancing scene. The band had a hard time getting anywhere in life, and then Footloose came along and their song Never got to be included there. Then it didn't have anything to do for quite some time because the band kept going in and out of hiatus and struggled to make songs through, but never became one of their songs to make it through. And Footloose was the necessary bump that still got them to be more recognizable. And they ended up having their song be featured again in the film Hot Rod with Will Ferrell. So funny enough how Footloose did make a lot of careers, but it revitalized many others that had these little ties to it. Now, I hate to bring up this part, and I literally hate that I just thought about this, but I guess it's time to talk about the remake of Footloose. The remake of Footloose is like the equivalent of nails on a chalkboard. Now, I say that being mean. There are some really good people in the remake of Footloose, but my God, it's like draining fun. It was already a dramatic film enough as it is, but the way Footloose worked was that it could breathe with the dramatic moments because it was meant to just be kind of an easygoing film. You got introduced to how the rules were so strict around here. The trailer, it just like opens up like way too dramatically, having the brother's death already be talked about when it would eventually be revealed. That's how it happened. No, your biggest core plot point is being used as the trailer bait. That kind of gives away the whole like way that you got to learn about this town. It's like giving everyone the spoilers already, why don't you? And, you know, for what it's worth, Dennis Quaid did try to be Reverend Shaw. I was shocked, but, you know, it was a choice. And I think Kenny Wormwood was Ren McCormick, and okay, I mean, he's no Kevin Bacon, but whatever. And my only good point to really say is a very then unknown Miles Teller playing the role that Chris Penn played, that was, I think, the only good choice that I liked. Everything just either felt like paint by numbers, or they didn't really do what Footloose did. And the whole point of a remake is to, do something close to your counterpart, but they just basically made it way too dramatic, and it just didn't really feel a little bit more uplifting. Footloose can be a fun film, but this remake just like drained what could have been the fun about it. Compare that to the trailer for the original Footloose, where you didn't really know how dramatic it was going to be, but it was still going to be a flick to go into. You could kind of breeze through it. No, not this one. This is just like, feels like you're breathing through your teeth. Just like, it's just not very pleasant. It'd be like foot tight instead of foot loose. Like, I can't even make up a good joke for that. That's just kind of how strict the remake was. It has popped up on top 10 worst remakes of all time, and it, after all these years, oh god, it hurts me to say that, it still hasn't aged well as its predecessor has aged very well. But one of the funniest things to find out in this movie, and it actually worked its way into the movie, is that Chris Penn can't dance. When Willard says he can't dance, Chris Penn 100% went into this film telling everybody, guys, I can't dance. And well, if you're in a film called Footloose, well, you're gonna learn to dance. Everyone that doesn't know how to do something, and they don't have the beat, but they want to learn, and you have to do this, the old-fashioned way, and you got to go through certain routines to learn the beat. When you're learning something that has to do with the beat, whether it's dancing or music, it takes a minute to find the rhythm before you find your own rhythm. When he's still learning how to dance and he's beating on the floor and his parents are looking up like, oh my God, what is he doing? Like, it's not going to be easy to learn how to dance. And Chris Penn's example of this is one of the most accurate that I've seen. And also incredibly funnily how it's sort of an improvised moment if you think about it. They wrote that into the movie that Willard can't dance, so you do get an authentic way of seeing Willard learn how to dance, because Chris Penn was actively learning how to dance. And the montage of him learning how to dance is probably up there in my top 10 favorite montages of all time, just to be existing for how uplifting it is. It's just a film where that dancing's gonna come back, but you get this one kid that's with the main hero of the movie that doesn't know how to dance, and he's having to learn the hard way, the frustrating hard way. This and Baby learning how to do the mambo in Dirty Dancing, it's like hand in hand. Seeing Willard go from learning the beat and then learning different types of dancing and then finally finding his own rhythm, it's like, this is the kind of stuff you root for. But the fact that the montage is also done to Let's Hear It for the Boy, it's just like cinematic poetry. Just pure cinematic, joyous poetry. Whoever did that montage, I hope they have a special place in awards for the rest of their life, because that was just too wholesomely edited together. So the one thing about Footloose that I noticed, and I don't know if anyone else has, so maybe this is just me, I don't think Footloose has a win in the end, but it has a resolve in the end. Footloose doesn't really have the resolve in the end. After Ren McCormick does his big stance and speech about how dancing should not be oppressed, it's a form of expressionism, it goes back to the Bible, it's a great speech, but it's not an instant change. All it is just words to a council that's still living in other times that they don't want to divide from. But it's not until Andy's boss says something that really does push the film forward. So Ren just goes back to working at the mill, and he's just going to graduate and be danceless, I guess, until Andy's like, you shouldn't have your whole thing go in vain, because what you said is true and you can't let them do this to you. But the whole point was to get dancing back in Beaumont, which wasn't accomplished in Ren's eyes. However, the boss makes a very good idea to have the prom at the mill. However, the mill is not exactly in Beaumont. And Andy says, well, the whole point is to make him think about it, so make him think about it. And Andy does make a very good point. Like, Ren went into this to change minds about dancing. Having the mill over there for prom, it does make sense to make someone think about it. A whole town of teenagers leaves town to go to prom. That is going to make someone think about it. That's a very distinct push away from olden times and getting to start anew. And that's something that Shaw just was not prepared for. However, if dancing is going to be deemed inappropriate, then everyone starts to wonder what else is inappropriate. And then the line of being offensive starts to dwindle into things that didn't have a problem in the first place. And that does make Shaw take a step back to realize where is the line drawn between offensive and having a town be protected. It does make Shaw think about it. Shaw isn't exactly wrong for wanting to protect people, but he isn't right for taking away something that was a form of expressionism, and sees that Wren wasn't in the wrong and also has his own way of being right about how things have to change. Having these two generations kind of meet in the middle to make a compromise, that is kind of where the win comes into play in Footloose, even though it's more of a resolve, because nobody exactly loses, because, you know, if this was a winning case, then someone would have lost, but no one really loses in this case, except Chuck, because he absolutely deserved to lose everything in the end. But everything wins in its own accord. The kids get to have dancing, and eventually things are going to change in their own town. This change doesn't exactly happen instantly, it happens over time, and at the end of the film it does look like Shaw is going to ease up on his times and bring something in new and let this go. And that's a good win in my book. But it goes back to what I said earlier, that all of that wouldn't have happened if Andy didn't push to say, make him think about it. That kind of changed the way I saw Footloose. Naturally, when all of us have to, find a resolve, your resolve is not going to be exactly how you pictured, but you still get what the resolve that you want. You cannot let that just go away. It's honestly one of the other underrated strongest parts to what feels to be a very cheesy film, but when you have to really analyze how this whole story works, it does have some very strong points. So as we're getting to the end of this episode, so to wrap up this episode, I want to kind of propose a question. How would you categorize Footloose? Because honestly, I couldn't even figure out where I could put this. It doesn't have a traditional story, even though it is a definite 80s story, all the way dripping, oozing with everything you could ever see. But if you had to look at it as a story not existing in the 80s, it's kind of a very unique sort of brand of storytelling that takes a true story and makes it into a tale of Wren McCormick trying to get dancing back into a town that hasn't had dancing for quite some time. Is that an underdog story? I don't think so, because underdogs usually have like this winning mentality, and this wasn't really about winning, this was about changing. The whole point of this was to change. This wasn't to rub in someone's face. This wasn't to make someone forget what they went through. It was just wanting to move on. And I know, where do you categorize that? I don't really know. I think it exists for the sole reason of just being a good story that doesn't have to be placed somewhere. It's just Footloose, what could go wrong with that? You got dancing, music, great acting, hell of a storyline, and no wonder people have been cutting loose for 41 years. There's probably going to be another 40 more years of cutting Footloose from here on out. So that is going to be a wrap for Cutting Loose on Footloose. This was a very fun episode, and after the time of my life that I've been going through lately, it was nice to reminisce about one of the films that ended up kind of helping me a lot more, and it probably helped to be reminded about a film that helped me out, and I hope it helped you guys out too. So, y'all know the drill. Next month is October, and that means we're going into my favorite time of the year, which is the Halloween series on the Screen Queen. This will be my 4th time doing the Halloween series. Wow, we're getting into a 4th time. That's just wild. I've decided to do the lineup differently this year. So I will be choosing Stephen King movies and TV shows and miniseries to take up the entire duration. So I was thinking, I'm not always going to be here forever doing this show, and if I want to be able to cover the things that I want to cover, then I'm going to go ahead and start getting that ball rolling and start making some of the ones that I really want to cover as time is going down. So I'm finally going to be chipping off some of the ones I mean to get to with an entire Stephen King series on the Screen Queen. But as a little additive, at the very end of the month, there's going to be a very special guest that's returning to the show. Until that day comes, let's find out what the first episode's going to be on the Stephen King series on the Screen Queen. Let me see here. Right, which one are you? Tell me your sins and secrets. Okay, well, I guess that makes sense to dive into what's considered the best miniseries of all time. A long one, but nonetheless a good one. For the first episode of the Stephen King series on the Screen Queen will be The Stand. Oh man, I am pretty sure a lot of you guys just groaned hearing that title, knowing what we're going to be getting into. Oh my god. Here we go. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start getting that preparation for that very probably long episode that's going to be happening for that one. Until then, you all take care, stay amazing, fight for what you want. If Ren McCormick can do it, then you can do it. This is your Screen Queen, signing off. Bye-bye!